Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing what makes an author good. And trust me when I say we won't be discussing craft. If you're interested in learning more, keep watching. Today I want to talk about what makes someone a good writer. And by good, I'm actually not talking or focusing on craft today. I'm not talking about the elements of storytelling. I'm not talking about structure or the journey of a character. I actually am talking about good in the sense of what makes you a conscientious writer. So, this topic is somewhat controversial, mainly because when we assign the terms good or bad to something, inherently it it leads to some people taking offense, and I would love to say that's not my intention with this video. Really, my intention is to highlight the things that an author in the year 2020 should truly be thinking about as they begin plotting and crafting out their stories. One of the things that I think is really important for authors to recognize um, is awareness. Being aware of the current economic and social circumstances of the time you live in, and also being aware of our current perspective on past events. So a good example of this is I'm sure even if I check Amazon right now, I will probably find at least at least one World War II romance that has been published within the last month where the main theme of the story is, or one of the main characters or love interest is a Nazi soldier. So the reason that's problematic, not I don't know why I have to explain this, but having having a character who is in a concentration camp or a character that is being persecuted fall in love with their persecutor or tormentor is incredibly problematic, particularly when you're looking at the scenario of Nazi Germany. The same concept applies to if you're reading a romance and the main characters, one happens to be a slave and the other a slave owner. When you're thinking about power dynamics, that just doesn't work. And it's actually incredibly tone deaf. So, if you want to be a good author, those are things that you need to consider when you decide that I've got this idea and I think this would be a great romance. You really have to stop and think to yourself, okay, am I following this kernel of an idea because I'm married to the idea? Or am I aware that the idea itself is problematic and there might be another way for me to do this story without including those problematic elements? Because a romance doesn't necessarily, like, you can have somebody fall in love with, not a slave owner or not a Nazi soldier. Ideas. So that's those are things that I would throw out there. And I will actually be 100% honest. I have my very first book, Negotiating Skills, which to this day I still love. I know that post Me Too movement, I would most likely not um, release the book as it was released in 2012 because there are some power dynamic issues in that book that I know today would be considered incredibly problematic. I wrote that book mainly as my response to a lot of the Harlequin romances I read when I was a kid, or like more teenager, where there are always these plain Jane falls in love with the boss dynamics that I always loved, and I kind of turned it a little bit, but at the same time, still it's a workplace romance that today I would most likely handle differently because of the power dynamic issues. Another thing that authors really need to be aware of is agency and and how we create our characters, particularly female characters and younger characters. For those of you writing in the um, new adult space, it's, I feel, even more so important to be aware of agency and providing your characters with a voice. And I'm not talking about that new term everyone loves right now, like the voicey character. I'm saying it's important not to make your characters helpless for helplessness's sake. It's important that your characters have agency. It's important that your characters have the ability to change their lives and they're not solely dependent on others to move the action forward. Um, and when we think about romance and we think about the history of romance and we think about the fact that it empowers women particularly, I think it's really important for authors to know that they, or to be aware that they shouldn't be creating these helpless characters who require a hero. The purpose of a romance is for characters to fall in love with each other and for characters to go on this journey towards love, not for characters to be solely dependent on each other, and for characters to not be able to function without their love interest. They have to have agency. They have to have, um, they just have to have the ability to voice their wants and needs and move forwards in a plot towards getting it, and not constantly be rescued by the other character. I think now even more, like I don't have any children, but I am surrounded by a lot of young women, and I get so excited when I can give them a book that shows, here's a woman taking charge, because a woman can take charge, and women do take charge every single day, every single day, every second of the day. And it's important, I think, for women, particularly young women, to see this. So another thing I think authors really need to be cognizant of is diversity. And I know you guys, please don't tell me this is a surprise. I'm sure you saw this coming. Diversity is so important to include, and I am saying this across every subgenre of romance, because diverse characters existed in every moment of history, in every location in history. Within fantasy, diversity should be acknowledged or captured even more so, because in fantasy books, as an author, you have the opportunity to create a world. And if, as an author, you create a completely homogenous world, I, as a reader, would believe that you are being an incredibly lazy author. Or just an incredibly tone deaf author, because you're telling me that in the fantasy that you perceive, or in the future you perceive, there is only white, cis, abled characters, which is problematic. And that kind of brings us all the way back to being aware, having awareness, and just trying not to be problematic for problematic's sake. And now when we go into contemporary, it's important to include diversity, because in all honesty, if you are having your stories take place in New York City and all your characters are of one race, one ethnicity, one religion, uh like set of gender identities, and all abled, then you're not capturing New York City. And you might as well have switched your story to actually nowhere else would work, because people of all types exist everywhere in the world right now, in all pockets. So it's really, really important to make sure you're capturing that. Otherwise, your books no longer feel realistic. And I'm turning 40 this year, and I can tell you right now that this is an expectation that I have at my age. And I can tell you, the younger generation of readers, this is an expectation they have now. So if they're picking up your books and they're feeling as if your contemporary actually feels like a fantasy because it is so homogenous, then as an author, you have to recognize, one, that this is always going to impact your reader base. Your reader base will never fully expand because it'll always be that narrow base you have right now. You won't expand into younger readers or a wider reader group if you keep that, if you keep writing in that same world. An argument I love hearing is, oh, but I write small town romances. I love this argument because if you live in a small town and you're telling me your entire cast is going to be homogenous, I want you to go out into your small town and I want you to check off the boxes. I know that sounds really up. That sounds really up. But go into your small town, walk around, and if you come back to your desk, come back to your laptop or your writing space, and you tell me that all you saw were white, Christian, able-bodied, cisgendered people all around you, and there was nothing aside from that, then you go ahead and you write your small town romance with that, with that homogenous cast. But if you tell me that actually there were more people and I just don't normally see them, but now I do, then you kind of need to re-examine your plot. The last thing I want to speak about is openness or open-mindedness. And this one's kind of iffy for me. Not iffy in the sense that, do I believe this is something that all authors need to practice? 100%. I totally believe that. It's more on the cusp because really I feel like this is covered with the term professionalism, where if you decide that you're an author and you're putting your work out there in the public sphere, understand that the public has every right to critique and speak about your work. And in that same vein, the public has the right to speak about your work. And as a good author, I think it's really important and you're responsible for listening to those critiques. Constructive criticism is really, really important for an author to recognize and absorb. I'm not saying that when you receive a review that you should reply to it. 100% no. You should never be replying to reviews. However, if you've released something into the public sphere and there is a critique or there are critiques on it regarding things that may be problematic, it is really important that as an author, you listen, because things that you may not have been aware of that were problematic may have been. And it's integral that you as an author become aware of those things. So one, you don't repeat the same mistake, because I honestly don't want to go through this world knowing that I've caused offense and making the decision to continue to cause that same offense. Because at that point, you're just being but that's my opinion and it's my channel, so whatever. But I do think that's really important. I think a lot of times people don't mean offense. A lot of times people cause offense because they're unaware that something is going to cause offense. But once that veil has been lifted, once you know something is offensive, do not defend the offensive thing. And when I say do not defend it, I say do not come out and say, well, that wasn't my intention. Because guess what? That means diddly squat. It may not have been your intention to cause harm, but you caused harm. So honestly, the only thing you can do at that point is apologize if you truly recognize that you caused harm. So that's where I really think that openness and open mindedness is really important to becoming a good author. So that's really it. It's not an exhaustive list. I think it's a list of very common sense things. Yes, to become a good author, a great author, even, you need to work on your craft. But in an age of social media, in an age where people share, and the fact that honestly you're putting your books out there for the public to consume, it is important to think about what not just makes you a technically good author, but what also makes you a good author. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by and listening to my rambles. If you like the content and you like this video, please make sure to let me know in the comments below. You can like or subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for next topics, also please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, see you next time.